Hello, hello, and welcome back to Girl We Gotta Talk. Today, I am joined by Janet Bayramyan. She is a licensed clinical social worker and a certified EMDR therapist. So, today's episode, she's going to just really help us all out. We're going to talk about how to manage anxiety, practicing self compassion, and maintaining healthy and happy relationships and friendships. And then she's going to give us some pointers on like how to soothe your body. She has an incredible social media presence, and if you can appreciate a good Instagram feed, Janet has a great one. I was just telling her I really appreciate everything she posts, and it's super helpful information and very soothing, if that makes any sense. So, Janet, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. What a sweet introduction. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, of course. I'm so happy to have you on. I feel like all of what we're going to talk about is just super important, and I feel like it's not really like talked about that often. So I'm just excited to cover topics like this, and hopefully we can help, or you can help somebody listening today. So with the year that we've had, I feel like mental health just needs to be discussed more, and I feel like it's just so beneficial to just be open about it and talk about feelings and all of that. So, if you want to just go ahead and kind of introduce yourself a little bit better and just explain exactly like what you do.
Awesome. Yeah. And you're right. Mental health is so important to talk about. I love to have these conversations with everyone. So, like you said, I appreciate the introduction. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, licensed therapist. And what I do is I essentially offer virtual counseling for individuals and couples. And the majority of the work that I do is in supporting couples in improving their relationships. Mainly, a lot of it is communication, improving intimacy, kind of getting on the same page with certain things. And individually, a lot of the work that I do is helping people just get through difficult life transitions. I also have a soft spot for trauma survivors, so I support survivors, in their recovery process. And then, of course, with the year that we've had, helping people get through depression and anxiety.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. What got you into this field in the first place?
Great question. I get asked this all the time. So, what I'll say is every therapist has their story as to what brings them into this field. For me, it wasn't something that I consciously chose until probably around some time when I was in college, where I actually was going through a difficult time myself with depression. And I was also struggling with eating disorders at the time. And I had some amazing support in therapy. And I realized that therapy is just so valuable and powerful, and it can really change your life essentially. And that's what it did for me. And after going through my own process of therapy at that time, I decided I wanted to do the same thing as a therapist on the other side. So I went to college, studied psychology, and then a couple years after that, pursued my LCSW.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I feel like therapy within maybe like the last like I don't know, 10 years or so has kind of lost that stigma that it had. I feel like a lot of people judged others for going to therapy, but I feel like now it's something where it's like it can be appreciated. And I think people are realizing the actual importance behind it. And so I think that's awesome that you kind of like recognize, like, well, I want to help others too. This helped me. So, as far as anxiety, we kind of mentioned before, like this past year, like has brought, I think, a lot of anxiety to a lot of us. And there are obviously different stages to that and different levels of anxiety. But what would you recommend if someone is, I guess, how would you manage the anxiety? Kind of like that first step of like doing so.
Yeah, so anytime we're looking at behaviors and trying to either change or modify behaviors, is first what I work with clients on doing is understanding how anxiety manifests. Because for every person, anxiety shows up incredibly differently. One size doesn't fit all. So for some, for example, anxiety manifests physically and somatically, having butterflies or pain in my stomach or carrying tension in my shoulders or even just some like chronic pain, physical symptoms. For others, anxiety shows up in having challenges with maintaining sleep. For others, it's feeling constantly nervous or on edge. For others, it's having negative thoughts. So, first, I would say awareness is key in understanding how is it manifesting for me? How is anxiety showing up? That would be the first step. The second step is what I would say is it's going to be important to understand that anxiety is serving a purpose and function. And what I'll say is it gets a bad rap. A lot of these, mental health systems or issues get a bad rap. And really, we have to understand that even though it's incredibly uncomfortable, it serves a purpose. So, what is in terms of the anxiety, in terms of how it's showing up, what purpose is it serving for me? Is it trying to protect me? Is it trying to keep me safe? Is it trying to, for example, have these walls up for whatever reason? That's also an important conversation that we have to have with ourselves. And third, depending on how the anxiety manifests and the reasons why it's showing up in your life, it's important, like you said, to work on managing it. I like to be very realistic. I don't believe that like anxiety is going to 100% go away. If I had that power to make that happen for someone, I would be a millionaire,
Yeah.
right? But a more healthy, realistic goal could be, how can I manage it? So if I'm having, for example, a negative thought associated with anxiety, how can I challenge that thought into potentially a more accurate thought? Or if I'm having an issue where I'm holding like tension in my shoulders, I can do a mindfulness activity to, bring my shoulders down, for example. So there's a lot of layers to anxiety management. And I would say it's going to be important to understand why it's showing up, if we have an understanding of that, how it's manifesting, and then understanding how we can manage it as it shows up in the moment.
I think that's a really good tip. Would you recommend like someone that is starting to, I guess, be aware of these anxieties? Would you recommend them just like trying to handle it on their own in those ways, or would you recommend them seeking help, or is there like a level of anxiety that you should be able to handle on yourself or to seek help? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So we all have a specific spectrum of anxiety. We all have maybe certain things that trigger us that maybe don't trigger others, for example. So, again, one size doesn't fit all for everyone. So, you know, we got to be real with ourselves is a big thing. So, the biggest factor in looking at should I seek help, like professional help or not, is whatever I'm doing in terms of trying to manage it, is it not working? Is it not improving it? Is it not making my life better? Is my functioning impaired? Am I not able to go to sleep? Am I not able to go to work? Am I not able to spend quality time with my family? Am I engaging in unhealthy behaviors in life? That's really the big question. If it's whatever's happening, if you're not able to function, in your day to day, then it might be good to seek out some help. If you're just noticing that, for example, something small is happening, in terms of anxiety, like I'm drinking more coffee and that's why my anxiety is up, that's a little bit simpler. I can cut down, my coffee intake and, it can get better. So it really depends on what level, what spectrum you're noticing the intensity of the anxiety and the behaviors associated with it.
Okay, that makes sense. So, as far as like maintaining healthy relationships and friendships, you were kind of touching on this earlier about how you kind of like specialize in relationships and things like that. So, I feel like a lot of times people can find themselves in situations or like relationships where boundaries are crossed, but they don't really know how to handle those situations. And as far as like relationships go, I guess we can stick to that one first. How would you recommend handling this? Like the kind of situation I'm thinking of is maybe like manipulation in a relationship and maybe realizing that you are being manipulated. How would you go about that or, start that conversation or, manage that at all?
Yeah, and I have a lot of compassion for people because growing up, it's not common for a lot of people to be taught how to set boundaries. And there are many different types of boundaries. So, for example, a boundary that we all follow, for example, is when we're driving our car, we stop at a red light. That's a very like common legal boundary that we go through in order to get to the specific locations we need to go, and be safe. So there are common things that we all follow culturally, I would say, but then there are more implicit boundaries that are not as obvious. The example that you brought up, manipulation, when we're being manipulated in a relationship. So that is something that I do see as a boundary violation, because boundary violations are essentially when our rights are violated. I would take it the one step further and consider that to be more on the like abuse spectrum, because not all boundary violations are abusive. So for example, a boundary I may have is, I don't pick up my phone calls after 10 p.m., right? Because let's say that's the time that I go to sleep. That's the specific boundary I have. Now, if somebody calls me at 10 p.m., it's not necessarily them trying to manipulate me or be abusive with me. It's, maybe they forgot, or maybe, for example, it was an emergency, right? But if someone is manipulating me into doing things that I'm not comfortable with, then yeah, that is a violation. And I would consider that more on the abuse spectrum. So, in terms of how we handle that, first step, of course, like I said previously, is awareness. We want to have awareness that our values, our boundaries, our rights are being violated in the moment. And from there, we have to make a decision. We can't always set boundaries because sometimes it's not safe. I'm thinking of more severe examples like domestic violence situations. But in other instances, for example, like let's say a partner is communicating by yelling, and that's a boundary violation. Somebody can set the boundary of, you can't talk to me that way. I need you to go and cool off and come back after you're a little bit more calm. That is simply setting a boundary in that way. So we have to be aware when it's happening. And I believe we also need to be aware of what our boundaries are and what's important to us, because all of it is essentially values based.
And as far as like communication in relationships, I know everyone's like communication is key, which I agree. But how would you recommend like just communicating in general, and like what are some of the, I guess, key points that you like to share with others on that?
That's a good question. So what we want to notice first is our communication pitfalls. What happens in terms of, let's say, your communication in a relationship or partnership where, let's say, things go wrong? What can I, for example, take responsibility for? So if I out myself, for example, when I'm triggered or when I'm feeling uncomfortable, I tend to shut down quickly. Like that is my go-to sort of reaction. And so I've had to be aware that when I shut down, I am not ready to communicate. I am not ready to have a thoughtful conversation because my headspace is in a different space. So we have to be aware first of what are our communication pitfalls, whether you shut down, whether you flee, whether there's high reactivity in the moment. We want to be aware of that. If you want to even take it one step further, you can look at your family growing up and identify what was some of the communication that you observed that was helpful and maybe not helpful, because our parents essentially were our role models for that. So that's going to be important to be aware of. And for example, am I doing anything that I saw in my parents' communication that is part of, my unhealthy dynamic, for example? That's also important. And third, what we want to do is we want to understand what our needs are in the moment. What is my value in terms of communicating in my relationship? Some people want, for example, a solution to the issue. Other people want to be validated. Other people want to be heard. I know for me, I just want to be heard and I want to be listened to. That is something that's really important to me. So we want to understand that about ourselves. And then from there, we can come up with strategies as to um, how can we keep the communication going. So those are some of the basic, I would say, like preliminary steps in understanding the maybe the unhealthy dynamics that are happening, and how we can start working through them.
It's really interesting that you say, like looking at your parents or your family and kind of seeing how they have communicated like while you were growing up. I feel like that, like as you said it, I was like, because I think seeing how they communicated good and bad is exactly why I am the communicator that I am. Um, because I am the communicator that wants to get it out right away. Like if there's an issue, then I just want to talk about it and I want to just solve it. You said like find a solution. And I don't want to hold it in and hold a grudge and avoid it. And I just want it to be like out there on the table and I want it to be like squashed. And I think that is because of seeing my parents and my family communicate good and bad. Like, not that they're bad communicators or good communicators or whatever, but seeing them is why I'm the way I am.
Mhm.
Um, but that's interesting. I guess when it comes to relationships and being like the communicator that you are, I guess is it important to share that you're that communicator and because your significant other could be the opposite, and if I'm the one that wants to solve it right away and my significant other is the one that shuts down, like how would I go about, I guess, like trying to open them up and to talk about it?
Yeah, it is. You're right. I mean, it's amazing that you have that awareness now. And I would say yes. The more that you can be aware and share, how you communicate with your partner, the better it can be for you guys. Because let's say when an issue comes up, or when something may start turning into an argument, you guys will know, oh, wait, I'm going into my, let's figure this out. Let's come up with the solution. Oh, wait, I'm going into shutting down right now. You'll see that response happening right away. In terms of what you said something very interesting. How can I get them to communicate? One of the pieces, again, coming from like my very realistic lens, is we can't force anyone to communicate with us if they're not ready, or if they're not, again, in that headspace in that moment. So if, let's say, you have someone in the relationship that is shutting down, you got to give them their like 10, 15, 20 minutes to do what they have to do to cool off and be present, and then come back and have that conversation when both of you are able to be present. Oftentimes what happens when someone shuts down is they're flooded. It's completely overwhelming in the moment. They're not really here. You know what I mean? Like, people shut down, they might, avoid, they might, displace their thoughts. That happens often. So if someone's not present, how can they have that conversation in the moment? So we have to allow someone their space, and definitely come back, once they're more present and calm again, to be able to have that conversation.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Kind of like giving them their time so that you guys can work on it and figure it out. So, as far as friendships go, it's a little bit different, I guess, but I think having boundaries and communication is still obviously like important. How would you say like communication within a friendship is different from the communication you should have in a relationship, or is it the same?
I mean, I actually don't think it's any different at all, because friendships also serve a purpose. Friendships are there so that, we can connect, we can bond, we can express who we are. And that happens in our, romantic, intimate relationships as well. I don't see it as any different. I mean, if someone in your friendship circle is violating a boundary, we have to set a boundary with them. We have to kind of call them out a little bit in that moment. And I honestly don't see a difference at all in terms of, ways in which we can communicate who we are and communicate our needs.
Okay. For friendships, I feel like sometimes, and I'm speaking for me personally, when you lose a friend, or, you and that friend don't speak anymore, or you cut them out of your life or vice versa, sometimes it can be harder for you, than like a breakup could be. I don't know why really that is. I guess it's just like a different bond that you held. And then I guess also when you get into a relationship, I feel like you either end up with that person forever or you expect you're probably going to break up. But when you get into a friendship, I don't think that anyone really anticipates you breaking up. So then when it happens, you're a little bit like caught off guard and it's like more emotional. At least that's been the case for me. So as far as, I guess, cutting a friend out of your life, and that sounds very aggressive, but maybe as far as like recognizing like a toxic friendship, what would you say are those like red flags and things to like notice if, you are in that toxic friendship?
So first, we would have to um, identify and define what is toxic. So, example you shared previously, manipulation. That's toxic in a relationship of any kind. If someone is saying mean or hurtful comments, not respecting boundaries, dragging you into situations where you're not feeling comfortable, that is a toxic dynamic. So there are several things that can be done. First, I mean, if you feel comfortable sort of being assertive with your friend and saying, look, when this the other day happened, it made me feel really uncomfortable, and sort of just calling it out and stating how you felt and what happened, that's something that you can certainly do. It'll be a good sign if that friend will say, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I had no idea that that's how you felt. And sort of they take that responsibility. It is not a good sign, though, if that friend is defensive, minimizing feelings, not taking any sort of responsibility. That is not a good sign. And so from there, I mean, again, the decision would be up to you as to what do I do in this situation? Do I sort of keep waiting to see what happens, or am I making a decision to end the friendship? There's no right or wrong. We just have to do what's helpful and what's good for our lives. So in terms of ending a friendship, again, I'm very much about being assertive. I don't know that I necessarily agree with like the ghosting culture of our our lives. Sometimes it is important to be explicit on, here's why we can't be friends. Here's why we can't communicate anymore. This is where I'm at. This is how I feel.
Yeah, I think the being assertive part was something that I had to grow into. I was never really, not that I would ghost anybody in a friendship, but I would kind of just hold it in and stick through it, and it wouldn't be like a healthy friendship at all. And so I had to be assertive, and I had to talk to my friends and just be open and talk about how I was feeling and figure it out from there. But I think that's great advice, because I think, yeah, with friendships, like sometimes people just don't want to walk away from them, and it's sad to walk away from them. But at the same time, I think friendships and friends come into your life for certain reasons, and I think it's okay to do so if it's gonna better you and if you're gonna be the better person afterwards, Because I've definitely found myself in situations and friendships where I'm not the best version of myself in those friendships, and it just took me a while to kind of recognize that. So yeah, I think all of that was like really, really good advice. So I want to talk about the 7 ways to soothe your body, because you put this on your Instagram, and I just really appreciated it. And I think we could all use a little relaxation, and like that self compassion and that self like care. So could you explain to everyone what those are?
Yeah, I did add it to my Instagram. And these are only like a few examples of many ways to soothe your body. So, one of the ways, I'm a big proponent on basically being very aware of what's going on in our body. So, for example, let's say you and I are having session together and you talk about an experience where you felt anxiety. I may ask you, Elena, where are you noticing the anxiety in your body? And I ask that question because we tend to hold a lot of our feelings also in our body. Our body carries our different stories as well. And so, for example, you may say, I'm feeling the anxiety in my shoulders, or I'm feeling it in my stomach or my hands, wherever it may be. So, one of the things that I do with my clients is something called a body scan, where we essentially scan the entire body, head all the way down to the feet, just to notice, like, where are we feeling things? Where are we feeling maybe the charge or the intensity? Where are we feeling a little bit more calm or relaxed? Where are we feeling neutral? That is really helpful and important, because when we know where we're carrying tension, we can work with it. And so that's called a body scan meditation that, you can find some information about it either online or even on my Instagram.
Okay. And as far as just practicing self compassion and like tips for, I guess, just like rebuilding your self worth, like what would you say to that? What does that mean, I guess?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, it's so individual for everyone. That's like the $1 million question. How do you rebuild self-esteem? Um, well, we want to look at where was sort of the lapse. Do I have a low self-esteem because I experienced, a traumatic event that changed my perspective of myself? Or did I experience, my parents or my family putting me down? Or was I shamed for my weight? There were so many reasons why self-esteem, is not where, people want it to be in their lives. So we want to look at that. We want to look at how that sort of started to come into play in the past. We want to look at how it's showing up now. Am I making decisions, poor decisions, that are based on my low self-esteem? So we want to look at that. And, there are many ways to approach it. So, for example, if I'm, someone that binge eats, and that's like my coping mechanism for how I feel, let's say, about my weight, that is very complicated to work through. It's very slow, and something that clients take quite a bit of time to work with. But for example, one of the things that I can do to help improve that is I can identify maybe what's triggering that episode of the binge eating, or I can identify that I can maybe slow down as I'm engaging in that behavior. There's so many ways to work with it. It really just depends on where sort of that like lapse is in our lives. But I would say, as you go through the process, and that's something I would say, to work with a therapist that you feel comfortable with, that you trust, to really work on, how can we start rebuilding some of that.
Okay. So I guess just like more so acknowledging maybe where it's all stemming from first and then going from there and seeking help or that sort
Yeah.
of thing. Okay.
Yeah, it can be any way. I mean, maybe at first you don't know where it stems from, but as you start,
Mhm.
talking to a therapist, you may start realizing it, or that story can start developing after, trying out different ways of working with it. It can happen in so many different ways. Going back to what you talked about with like moving on with friendships, I like what you said in terms of it being hard but sometimes necessary in life. And I just wanted to add to that because, like you said, people are in our lives sometimes for a short season. And I want to add to that, sometimes we might outgrow certain people, and sometimes we might outgrow friendships. And that's not a bad thing. It doesn't mean that you're a bad person, or your friend or former friend is a bad person. It just happens. And so when that evolution happens, we do have to assess, like, is this relationship working in my life? Do I need a little bit more distance with that person, or can I be close with them? That often happens a lot as we grow and evolve. I often even see it with my clients, where they'll start therapy, they'll start growing, into who they are and who they want to be. And some of the friendships in their lives aren't working in the same way that it used to be. So, I again wanted to validate that process.
Yeah, I mean, do you have any, I guess, thoughts on, because you talked about being assertive and I don't know, do you have any like advice on maybe communicating that with your friend in the moment, that maybe you are sensing like I am outgrowing this friendship. I don't want to hurt them, but like I don't, I guess, want to ghost them either. Like, is there a way to kind of go about that in a like nice, like a nice way?
Perhaps, I mean, perhaps there can be a soft way of delivering that. I don't know, you would, if you would want to say, like, I feel like I've outgrown you, that
Right.
might offend someone.
Yeah.
Um, but I mean, you can always put it in a way of like, I just don't feel that we have, the similar interests anymore, or the right chemistry anymore, or I don't find myself really enjoying our time together in the way that we used to, or things about our friendship, have made me feel uncomfortable, or I feel like I can't relate in the same way that we used to relate to each other. Like, there's so many ways to express it. Now, what I'll say is, we don't have any control if we offend someone. We might say it in the softest way, and the other person might say, "Oh my God, what the F is wrong with you?" They may not like it. We don't have any control over that. And honestly, that has to be okay, because we can't always tiptoe or walk on eggshells around people. That's not fair to us.
Yeah, and again, that's something that I had to personally work on, was the tiptoeing and just like saying how I actually felt because it was going to be better for me. And not just with like anything in life, not just friendships and stuff. But I think ultimately, and like everything we've talked about today, I just think at the end of the day, like you just have to do what's best for you, your mental health, and whatever's going to make you happy. You need to do those things in order to get there. And I think everything that you've said today is like exactly that, and like ways to do that. And I guess build yourself back up if you're not like your best self right now. There are ways to like go about that and to get there. So I really appreciate all of your advice today and talking with you. Where can people find you? I know you just started a YouTube channel, contact you, all of that.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for that. So I'm on Instagram. I do post daily. My handle is at therapy with Janet B. So you can find like daily tips and information about, different mental health info and stuff like that. You can also find me on YouTube now. I'm going to post every other week videos again on mental health tips and topics. So if you guys have also any recommendations or feedback on what you want to hear about, I would love to hear that as well. And you can find me on YouTube at Road to Wellness Therapy. And you can also find me at my website, www.roadtowellness.co, and learn a little bit more about my work there.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, and I will link everything that she just mentioned in the show notes so you guys can just easily find all of what she just said. But that's awesome. Thank you so much again for coming on. I love talking to you. You're just like so great and you're helping so many people. So thank you again. Be sure to follow Janet on all of those social medias and find her on her website. And then be sure to follow Girl We Gotta Talk podcast on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and I'm on TikTok now. But yeah, thank you guys so much for listening. Bye.